Bây giờ thì Phương Thảo xin phép sẽ thực hiện phần Q&A bằng tiếng Anh với các diễn giả. Vì vậy mà quý vị của chúng ta hãy vui lòng nhấn vào phần chuyển ngữ trong thanh công cụ của Zoom để có thể lắng nghe những chia sẻ một cách tốt nhất ạ. Okay, so firstly, we will have two questions for Mr. John Davies. So I will read it one by one and please help to answer it. So Mr. Davy, the first question is, what is the process, for example, test pilot of government approval, time or estimates cost to commercially deploy a new low carbon brick in Australia?
Oh, that's a very complicated question. There's a number of sort of elements to that. There are existing standards, which I think a few speakers have spoken about. So familiarization with those existing standards. If the product already complies with existing standards, then it's going to be a lot easier. If the product, because of its ingenuity, is something that doesn't fit within existing standards, then the best way forward is really to partner with someone that might want to use a lot of those bricks, or in terms of a contractor, or probably better, a client that might want to use a lot of them and get their assistance and knowledge of inside Australia to seek the necessary regulatory approvals of that. And to get that partner interested, obviously to have some information around just what are the benefits of the product in terms of that reduced embodied carbon compared to existing products, similar products, but then also what are the cost comparisons as well, and any other potential efficiency comparisons that can be made with other existing products.
Okay, thank you so much. And we will got two more questions. So the next question is, what construction material are now in short supply in Australia and must be imported from abroad? And because of the high exporting standard of the Australian market, many of our Vietnamese business are interested about, like, are there any type of construction material that do not need to meet Australian standard when exported to Australia?
Look, I think one of the biggest opportunities, and I'm sure a number of companies will already be operating this area. Steel is something that we use an incredible amount of in Australia. It's something that we do manufacture domestically, but that domestic supply is not able to meet demand. That domestic supply also tends to focus on sort of higher grade qualities of steel, again, so that they can compete, they can better compete. So I think that there are opportunities from a steel perspective, and again, potentially around lower carbon content steel. We are about to embark on a very significant investment in new energy that requires a large investment in energy transmission, energy towers, energy cables. These are all things that there isn't any substantial domestic capability to supply. A lot of that will be sourced from external markets. So that is probably another area. Timber is another area that we domestically have a shortfall in. So two very sort of, I guess, simple materials, but within those materials, there are a range of quality types and different types of product that are made out of those basic materials. So there'll probably be two areas that I'd suggest people look into.
Okay, thank you. And the last question for Mr. Davy. In Australia, what are some new initiatives and technology that are being applied to minimize the environmental impact of construction activity, and what can Vietnamese business learn and take advantage from it?
So again, back to really from a material standpoint here, if we look there's a lot of work happening in roads, for example, in road materials, utilizing recycled content, whether that be recycled rubber tires as part of roads, whether that be recycled glass in both roads and in concrete aggregates. It's an interesting fact that actually worldwide there's a shortage of sand for construction materials. And the reason for that, when you think, well, there's sand everywhere, isn't there? You need a particular type of sand for construction products. Sand from beaches is no good because all of the granules are too rounded. You don't get the cohesion. And therefore, the actual sort of sand that we need for construction and sand is just about the biggest consumed construction material worldwide is actually in short supply. So we're starting to look at alternate materials to sand, like crushed recycled glass. But there are also opportunities in terms of residential construction. As Alan said, it's not something that our members focus on too much, apart from the very large residential blocks. But there is a big focus on reducing energy consumption in the residential sector through use of products that have a higher insulation value. So, for example, roofing components would be one example of that, or wall paneling systems as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Davey, for your sharings. I think we can move to the next question, and it will be for Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen, in your presentation, you have mentioned 10 points to consider when building a strategy to enter the Australian construction market. So which factor do you think are the most important, like product, price, marketing, or partner? And which is the biggest constraint for Vietnamese business when they follow your suggested strategy?
Sorry, just say the last part of that question again.
Which factor do you think are the most important, product, price, marketing, or partner? And which is the biggest constraint for Vietnamese business when they follow your suggested strategy?
Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about the most important. You certainly have to start by having the number one point that your product has to be competitive from the price and quality perspective and meet Australian standards. Like, that's almost a given. You must have that in order to try to enter the Australian market. And you can do some analysis to work that out. So that is absolutely up there. I would say I'd say two other questions are very important. One is whether or not you need to have an Australian presence, and that links to who the customers are and how you interact with them. And the second being what Shanice was largely talking about is immigration strategy. If you need people, you have to have that aligned. So I'm sorry, that's not one, that's almost three in terms of making sure your product is right to start with from a price and a quality perspective, working out, do you need a presence in Australia to access those customers and build those relationships? And finally, have you got your immigration strategy worked out if you indeed are moving a big part of your business into Australia so that you have people to do the work? I'll leave it there.
Okay, you can.
Happy to go to the next question.
Okay, thank you so much. And the second question for you is as per growth forecast, the key is now residential building. So how to speed up the house permit for Vietnamese company to when they go to Australia?
Yeah, so the forecast is for the growth in the housing segment to be strong, but the overall size of the other segments is still going to be very large because they're at record high levels, even if they're slightly coming off. So I don't want to just emphasize the residential. But how do we get faster approvals for Vietnamese companies if they want to set up and be a full housing building developer? It often is at the local council level where that needs to occur in terms of housing approvals. There's work going on at the moment, and that'll apply to everybody, not just a Vietnamese company. And that's occurring through government processes. And there's a lot of focus on this right now because we have an acute shortage of houses in Australia, given the massive immigration that we have. These houses simply aren't keeping up with the people that we have. So everybody's working fast to try to solve this problem. And it means that there are opportunities for Vietnamese companies to help solve that problem.
Okay, thank you. And I think we can move to the last two questions, one for Ms. Janice and one for John. For Ms. Janice, and thank you so much again, Alan, for your thoughtful answer. For Ms. Janice, there's one question. I have a building team in Vietnam. Can I sign building contract with a company in Australia and bring them to work in Australia? What will be the requirement? Is there a limit to the number of sponsor employee? And can employees who are sponsored to work in Australia apply for permanent resident in Australia?
Wow, that is a very, very long question, which I will have to say that it would have to be broken into a lot of parts. Okay, so the first part is I have a building or construction business in Vietnam. Okay.
Can I sign?
So can I sign a contract with Australia? Right.
Yeah.
So the question is yes. Commercial law, you can sign a contract with anybody in the world. Australia doesn't have a law that says only Australian businesses can sign contracts with Australian businesses. Of course, right? Commercially, you can sign a contract with an Australian business, a Vietnamese business can sign a contract with an Australian business. However, this leads to the next question, which is, if you sign the contract, say you are a Vietnamese company and you sign a contract with the Australian side, can I bring people over to Australia? Yes and no. Okay. If you have a good relationship with your Australian local partner, they could be the entity that then sponsors, technicians or specialists to come over for this particular project. Okay. And then basically the Vietnamese company would have an agreement whereby the Australian company would then be responsible for those technicians, of course, with all the Fair Work and the labour laws of Australia. Okay. But then if the Vietnamese company that signed the contract with the Australian company would like to have a long-term vision of signing more contracts in Australia and supplying labour and supplying products to the Australian market, then it would need to consider whether it wants to go to Australia and set up in Australia or not. Okay, so the question that you've asked, I thank you. It is a very, very good question, but I can see that it is much more complex and would require a very in-depth examination of your organisation, its business strategy in Australia, how it wants to go to market or strategically develop in Australia, and then also have a labour or HR plan. Some of that may be Australian local labour, okay, and some of that may be migrated labour from its parent company in Vietnam. Okay, so thank you, but I can't answer that question in such a short time. I'm happy to take direct inquiries and assist this particular business. It sounds like a very interesting company. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Janice, for your sharing. And I think we can move to the last question for Mr. Sila. So about build it market. So the question is,